Captain Emily Walker was the kind of pilot passengers remembered, though they never really knew why. She wasn't flashy. She didn't make grand speeches over the intercom, and she never courted attention. Yet there was something about the way she carried herself, from the steady rhythm of her footsteps, through the jet bridge to the calm, almost soothing tone in her voice that made people relax. Nervous travelers found themselves reassured just by looking at her. Parents with children seemed less anxious. Business travelers loosened their ties, and elderly passengers smiled when she passed. For Emily, this life had become comfortable. She had been flying commercial jets for nearly a decade now. Her mornings began the same way, a uniform pressed to perfection, black rolling suitcase in hand, coffee in the other, and a quiet drive to the airport before the city had fully woken up. She loved the ritual of it, the rhythm of airline schedules, the predictability of flight plans. It was, in many ways, the opposite of the life she once lived. When she entered the cockpit, she was a different person. Her demeanor shifted instantly, no longer just the woman walking through an airport, but the captain in command of a massive machine worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She checked the instruments with precision, reviewed the flight plan, exchanged clipped professional words with her co-pilot, and then settled into the left seat. This, to her, was home. Her colleagues respected her, but they didn't pry. Aviation culture was filled with ex-military pilots, and while some spoke proudly of their service, Emily rarely did. She mentioned it only when absolutely necessary, usually brushing off questions with a polite smile and a change of subject. What few knew was that her military background wasn't just any background. It was the kind of history that turned heads in classified circles, the kind that whispered of missions no one discussed in public, the kind that carried both pride and a weight she didn't always want to revisit. To her passengers, however, none of that mattered. All they saw was Captain Walker, standing in the cockpit doorway before boarding, greeting them with a simple, "Good morning, welcome aboard." They trusted her because she seemed unshakable, and that was enough. On this particular morning, Flight 227 from Denver to Orlando seemed like any other. The sun rose over the Rockies as passengers shuffled aboard with carry-ons, chatter filling the cabin. Families spoke of vacations at Disney World. College students laughed about spring break plans, and weary business travelers tapped away on laptops. For them, the flight was routine. For Emily, it was another opportunity to do what she loved: fly. She sat in the cockpit, running her checklists. The co-pilot, a younger man named Harris, glanced at her with admiration. He had flown with her a few times before, and like most junior pilots, he couldn't help but notice her composure. "You've got the smoothest landings of anyone I've flown with," he remarked as he reviewed the weather reports. Emily gave him a small smile. "It's not about being smooth. It's about being precise. The rest comes with time." Her voice carried the weight of experience, the kind that made younger aviators listen. What Harris didn't know was that her precision had been honed in cockpits where mistakes weren't measured in bumpy landings, but in lives lost. As the engines roared to life and the plane pushed back from the gate, Emily's mind slipped briefly, as it sometimes did, to her past. She remembered a different kind of cockpit, smaller, tighter, surrounded by glass screens and switches, her helmet pressing against her head, oxygen mask secured. She remembered the thunder of twin engines behind her, the kind of thrust that pinned her to her seat as the aircraft screamed past the speed of sound. She remembered the endless training, the countless hours spent in simulators and skies, the drills that tested both skill and nerve. But she also remembered why she left. The military had given her everything: discipline, pride, the ability to push beyond what she thought possible. But it had also demanded everything in return. Deployments that stretched on for months, missions she could never talk about, losses that carved pieces from her heart. When she finally hung up her flight suit, it wasn't because she couldn't continue. It was because she had decided to live. Now, as the aircraft taxied onto the runway, Emily pulled herself back to the present. She had 169 souls behind her, trusting her to carry them safely through the skies. That responsibility, to her, was just as sacred as any mission she had flown before. "Tower, this is Delta 227. Ready for departure," Harris radioed. "Cleared for takeoff. Runway 34 left," the controller replied. Emily wrapped her hands around the yoke, steady and firm. "Here we go," she said softly. The engines thundered, and the aircraft surged forward. Runway lights streaked by in a blur as the jet accelerated. At precisely the right moment, she eased back, feeling the familiar lift as wheels left asphalt and the plane climbed into the morning sky. The city fell away beneath them, replaced by endless clouds and sunlight. For most pilots, this was the part where routine set in autopilot engaged, coffee poured, small talk shared. But for Emily, the climb always carried something more. It was a reminder of freedom, of why she had fallen in love with flying in the first place. She could still remember the first time she ever lifted off in a single-engine trainer as a teenager. That sensation of breaking free from the earth had never faded, even after thousands of hours. She glanced at Harris, who was already relaxing, flipping through his notes. For him, this was another day in his growing career. For her, it was another reminder of the contrast between who she had been and who she was now. Outside, the skies stretched forever, calm and quiet. Passengers settled into their seats. Flight attendants began their service, and the hum of the engines filled the cabin with a steady reassurance. No one on board suspected that their captain had once trained for moments when skies were anything but calm. Emily leaned back, eyes scanning instruments, ears tuned to every sound. She didn't expect trouble. Commercial flights were rarely anything but predictable, but she never let her guard down. Old habits, she knew, never really died. In many ways, she was grateful her passengers didn't know her past. To them, she wasn't a warrior, a pioneer, or a veteran. She was just their captain. That anonymity allowed her to move through life without the weight of constant questions or expectations. She had traded the roar of afterburners for the hum of turbofans, and in doing so, found a peace she hadn't thought possible. Yet, deep down, she also knew something else. The skies had a way of testing pilots, sometimes when they least expected it. And though she had chosen this quieter life, she understood that the skills she carried, the instincts, the reflexes, the calm under pressure, might one day be called upon again. For now, though, Flight 227 was steady, slicing smoothly through blue skies. Harris adjusted the autopilot. The cabin crew prepared coffee, and the passengers laughed, unaware of the hidden story in the cockpit. Captain Emily Walker sat in her seat, hands resting lightly on the controls, eyes watching the horizon. To the world, she was just another commercial pilot. But the skies knew her secret. She was something far more. And soon, those skies would remind her. The morning sun had already risen high, painting the clouds in shades of silver and gold as Flight 227 leveled at cruising altitude. The cabin was alive with quiet energy, children coloring in activity books, a couple sharing earbuds as they watched a movie, businessmen lost in glowing laptop screens. The comforting hum of the engines filled the air like white noise, steady and predictable. Captain Emily Walker allowed herself a sip of coffee, her eyes scanning the instruments with practiced ease. Everything looked perfect: airspeed steady, altitude locked, fuel levels optimal. Harris, her young co-pilot, was jotting down notes and smiling to himself. He looked like he'd already settled into the routine of the long haul. But Emily knew better. Experience had taught her that routine could change in an instant. And it did. At 35,000 feet, without warning, the tranquility shattered. A deafening bang ripped through the aircraft, followed by a violent shudder that rattled trays, spilled drinks, and sent gasps across the cabin. The entire fuselage seemed to lurch sideways as alarms screamed in the cockpit. Lights flashed across the instrument panel, each one signaling a different disaster. "What the hell?" Harris blurted, eyes wide, his hands frozen above the controls. Emily didn't flinch. Her body tensed, but her mind slowed. Years of ingrained training kicked in. "Left engine failure," she said crisply, scanning the panel. "Hydraulics unstable. We're losing altitude." The plane tilted dangerously, its left wing dipping. In the cabin, oxygen masks dropped with a hiss. Panic erupted. Passengers screamed, fumbling for masks, clutching children, gripping armrests with white knuckles. Luggage tumbled from overhead bins as the aircraft bucked violently. In the cockpit, the air was thick with urgency. Harris' hands shook as he grabbed for the checklist binder. "What do we—" "Focus," Emily snapped, her tone sharp but steady. "We fly the plane first. Always. Fly the plane." Her hands were firm on the yoke, compensating for the dead engine. Every adjustment felt heavier, like wrestling an animal determined to break free. She pressed rudder to counter the yaw, her muscles straining against the resistance. The cockpit filled with warning tones. One engine was gone. Systems were failing. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," Harris stammered into the radio, his voice cracking. "This is Delta Flight 227. Engine failure, losing altitude, requesting immediate vectors to nearest airport." Emily's eyes narrowed as she kept the aircraft level, or as level as possible under the circumstances. The altimeter needle was sliding downward, too fast. "Denver Center, this is Delta 227, declaring emergency," she said into her headset, her voice calm, measured, completely at odds with the chaos. "We've lost our left engine, and we're experiencing hydraulic issues. Maintaining as best we can." "Roger, 227, the controller replied, his voice tight. "Stand by, we're clearing traffic. You're cleared direct back to Denver International. Emergency crews are standing by." Back in the cabin, terror had consumed the passengers. A mother clutched her toddler against her chest, whispering desperate prayers. A businessman clawed at the armrest, sweat pouring down his forehead. A teenager sobbed into her phone, trying to get a signal that didn't exist at 35,000 feet. The flight attendants moved quickly, their training taking over, but fear was written on their faces. They repeated instructions, urging passengers to tighten their masks, to stay calm, though their own eyes betrayed them. In the cockpit, Harris' voice cracked. "Captain, we're dropping fast. We're not going to make it back to Denver at this rate." Emily glanced at the readings. He was right. They were bleeding altitude, and the hydraulic systems weren't responding correctly. Standard procedure said to follow the emergency checklists, to stabilize, to turn back. But she already knew something those checklists couldn't tell them. At this rate, the plane wouldn't survive without immediate, unconventional action. And that was when the past started to stir. She had seen this before, different machine, different altitude, different stakes. But the sensation was the same, the split-second recognition that the book wasn't enough. That survival depended on instincts honed in skies where hesitation meant death. "Take the checklist," Emily ordered sharply. "Read it." "I'll handle the aircraft." Harris fumbled with the binder, his voice quivering as he read the steps. "Engine 1. Throttle idle. Fuel cutoff switch." But Emily wasn't listening. She had already bypassed the standard sequence. Her mind was racing through possibilities, running calculations faster than her co-pilot could read them aloud. The aircraft shook again, dropping violently as turbulence slammed into it. A scream rose from the cabin. Harris gripped his seat. "We're stalling." "No, Emily cut in, pushing the nose down slightly, trading altitude for airspeed. The aircraft steadied, but only just. Her hands moved like they had in another life back when the cockpit was smaller, the controls sharper, and the stakes measured in seconds. The movements weren't the cautious, measured responses of a commercial pilot. They were the instinctive, exact motions of someone trained to wrestle a fighter jet through the edge of disaster. She banked slightly, compensating for the asymmetric thrust. To passengers, it felt like the plane was rolling violently. In truth, it was controlled barely, but controlled. "Captain, what are you doing?" Harris asked, his voice high-pitched, panic slipping through. "Flying the damn plane," she answered flatly, her eyes locked on the horizon. Alarms continued to shriek. Red lights flashed. The entire cockpit seemed alive with chaos. But in Emily's mind, there was silence. She was back in training, back in the simulator, back in missions where lives depended on impossible maneuvers. The difference was this time, 169 lives sat behind her, their fate tied to the calmness of her hands. In the cabin, passengers clung to each other as the jet trembled. A child cried out, "Are we gonna die?" A father, his own voice shaking, whispered, "No, sweetheart, the pilot's got us." And she did. Because Captain Emily Walker wasn't just a commercial pilot. She was something else entirely, something most of her passengers could never imagine. And though they didn't know it yet, her past as a Top Gun-trained F-22 fighter pilot was about to make the difference between tragedy and survival. The cockpit was alive with chaos alarms shrieked, lights pulsed red, and the vibrations of the crippled aircraft rattled every panel. The left engine was gone. Hydraulic pressure continued to drop, and the nose wanted to dip lower with every second. To Harris, the young co-pilot, it felt like disaster was tightening its grip with every passing heartbeat. He flipped frantically through the emergency checklist, his voice breaking as he tried to follow protocol. "Step 1, throttle idle," he stammered. His hands shook. Sweat ran down his forehead, dripping onto the laminated pages. Fuel cutoff switch. But Emily Walker wasn't listening. Her eyes weren't on the checklist. They were on the horizon, on the numbers, on the feel of the yoke beneath her hands. The shrill alarms faded into the background of her mind, replaced by a deeper focus, a calm clarity she hadn't needed in years. Instinct took over. Every pilot was trained to handle engine failures, but this wasn't just an engine out. The hydraulics were unresponsive in sections. The instruments were contradicting themselves. One system said stall, another said overspeed. It was the kind of situation that could unravel even the most experienced aviator. But Emily had flown here before, not in this jet, not in this sky, but in another life. Her mind drifted back, unbidden, to the Air Force flight line years ago. The roar of the F-22 Raptor's twin engines had been deafening, the smell of jet fuel sharp in the air. She could still feel the helmet pressed tight against her head, a visor narrowing her focus to the skies ahead. Cal signs echoed in her memory. Hers had been Valkyrie, a name chosen not for flair, but because she carried a calmness into battle that unsettled her peers. "Walker, you fly like ice water runs through your veins," her instructor had once told her after a high-speed intercept drill. No hesitation, no panic, just precision. That's why you're here. Now, years later, with 169 civilian lives behind her, that same ice water flowed again. "Hydraulic systems are failing. What do we do?" Harris's voice cracked, rising with fear. He was on the verge of freezing completely. Emily's voice cut through like a blade. "We don't panic. We fly the aircraft." Her tone was steady, but inside, her thoughts ran 1,000 miles an hour. She eased pressure on the yoke, feeling the resistance, gauging the aircraft's responses. The commercial jet wasn't built for acrobatics, But to her, every machine had its thresholds. She just had to find them. Another violent shudder rocked the fuselage. Passengers screamed. Drinks flew into the air. A flight attendant slammed against a seat, grabbing hold as the floor tilted beneath her. The intercom crackled with a terrified voice. "Captain, what's happening?" Emily didn't answer. Not yet. Words wouldn't save the plane skill would. Her mind shifted fully into combat mode. She began to visualize the jet like she had the Raptor years ago, a three-dimensional mental model. She knew what commercial pilots were supposed to do: stabilize, turn back, follow checklists. But she also knew that by the book, they were running out of options. At their current descent rate, Denver might not even be reachable. She thought of one thing: buying time. In the F-22, she had trained for unrecoverable situations. Tailspins at 40,000 feet. Inverted stalls. Hydraulic failures. Her instructors drilled into her a mantra: if the machine is broken, you bend it to your will. Don't let it dictate the fight. Now, she bent the yoke in a way Harris had never seen. To him, it looked reckless. To her, it was precise. She feathered the controls, using a combination of rudder and trim to counter the asymmetric thrust. The movements weren't in the checklist, but they were embedded in her muscle memory. "Captain, what are you doing?" Harris gasped, his eyes glued to the rapidly shifting instruments. "Keeping us alive," she said evenly. The plane steadied barely. The descent slowed. It was enough to stop the freefall, enough to give them a fighting chance. Back in the cabin, the passengers felt the change. The terrifying plunge eased into a steadier, though still jarring, turbulence. People clutched their masks, crying, praying, whispering thanks. A child whimpered into her mother's arms. A man crossed himself again and again, his lips moving silently. Emily finally pressed the intercom. Her voice, calm and even, filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've experienced a mechanical issue, but we have the situation under control. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll be landing shortly." She clicked off. No explanation. No drama. Just steady reassurance. She knew half the cabin wouldn't believe her, but the other half needed her voice to anchor them. "Denver's still too far," Harris said, his voice low now, almost defeated. "If we keep dropping like this, we won't," Emily cut in. She was already running calculations in her head. Airspeed, descent rate, glide ratios, wind patterns. She thought back to her days in the Raptor, intercepting targets with fuel nearly gone, calculating split-second trajectories at Mach 2. This was slower, heavier, more stubborn, but the principles were the same. Her eyes locked on the altimeter, watching the descent. She could feel the pressure in her chest, not fear, but the weight of responsibility. She wasn't just flying a machine. She was flying lives. Every single one of them counted. For a flicker of a second, she thought of her old squadron faces of pilots who hadn't made it back from missions. She thought of the promises she made to herself when she left the military, never again to carry lives so fragile in her hands. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. "Captain," Harris whispered, "I don't know if I can—" "Yes, you can," Emily said firmly. She glanced at him, her eyes steady. "You're not a passenger. You're a pilot. Do your job. Run comes. Stay sharp. I'll fly." Her words snapped him back, if only slightly. His hands steadied, his voice more controlled, as he relayed updates to air traffic control. "Denver Center. Delta 227 captains flying manually. Descending through flight level 320. Attempting to stabilize. Controllers on the ground scrambled to clear runways. Dispatch emergency vehicles. Reroute air traffic." But even they knew at this altitude and descent rate, things were grim. Emily knew it too. Yet she also knew something else. This aircraft hadn't reached its limits yet. And neither had she. She breathed slowly, her heartbeat steady. Her hands, sure and practiced, moved across the controls. Every adjustment was surgical. Every decision deliberate. The commercial jet was no F-22 Raptor. But in Emily Walker's hands, at that moment, it became something more. It became a fighter in a battle for survival. And she had no intention of losing. The jet groaned like a wounded animal as Captain Emily Walker gripped the yoke, feeling every vibration through her hands. The crippled aircraft wasn't just falling, it was fighting her, pulling against every correction, as though it had its own will to surrender. The left engine remained silent, dead weight dragging them down. The hydraulics flickered between partial responses and complete failure. Inside the cabin, fear had taken hold. A baby cried relentlessly. A businessman shouted at no one in particular, demanding answers the flight attendants couldn't give. Rows of passengers gripped hands, braced themselves, prayed aloud. The sound of panic was a tidal wave, pressing against the thin cockpit door. But inside that cockpit, Emily shut it all out. Her eyes flicked to the horizon, then down to the instruments. Airspeed was unstable, altitude bleeding faster than she liked. She knew Denver International's long runways were their best shot, but at this descent rate, they wouldn't make it. A standard emergency procedure wasn't enough. The book couldn't save them. Her training whispered, "When the machine refuses, you make it obey." "Captain, we're losing altitude too quickly," Harris muttered, his voice trembling. His knuckles were white against the checklist binder, eyes darting nervously between instruments. At this rate, Emily cut him off. Then we changed the rate. She adjusted the yoke in a way Harris had never seen, gentle but deliberate, easing the aircraft into a controlled slip. To the untrained eye, it looked reckless. To her, it was math, physics, and instinct dancing together. By angling the aircraft just slightly off-center, she used drag to stabilize airflow across the wings, countering the asymmetric thrust. The jet shuddered violently, as if protesting. Passengers screamed as the cabin tilted. Drinks and bags slid down the aisles. The overhead lights flickered. "Captain," Harris yelled. "That's not in the procedures." "No," Emily replied flatly, her eyes locked forward. "It's in the training." Her voice was so calm, so unwavering, that Harris fell silent. For the first time, he realized she wasn't just another senior captain with thousands of flight hours. There was something different in her tone, her precision, her willingness to push the aircraft beyond what most would dare. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly, but the ground was rising fast. The Rocky Mountains loomed faintly in the distance. Emily's breathing slowed, almost meditative. She was back in the F-22. She could feel the pressure of G-forces against her chest, hear the crackle of a radio in her ear, smell the sterile, oxygen-fed air of a fighter cockpit. In those days, the impossible was her daily routine barrel rolls at supersonic speed, evasive maneuvers on the knife's edge of physics, recovery from stalls that would kill lesser pilots. "Valkyrie, recover, recover." She remembered her instructor shouting during one brutal simulator run. She had done it then. She would do it now. The yoke fought back, heavy and uncooperative. Her muscles ached as she forced it into position. She added rudder, trimming aggressively, her feet pressing against pedals with controlled precision. The aircraft steadied, if only slightly. Air traffic control crackled through the headset. "Delta 227. Radar shows rapid descent." "Confirmed status?" Harris grabbed the radio, his voice still shaky. "Center. Delta 227 were in partial control." Captain is attempting recovery. Emily didn't speak. She couldn't. Every ounce of her focus was on the delicate balance of forces. One wrong movement, and the aircraft would spiral out of control. A cabin felt every change. To passengers, it was chaos drops, jolts, sudden angles. But beneath it all was a strange rhythm, as though the aircraft was finally being guided by someone who knew how to dance with disaster. A flight attendant clung to a seatback, whispering, "Come on, Captain. Come on." Emily's mind worked faster than the instruments. She calculated glide ratios, drag coefficients, crosswind patterns, all while keeping her hands steady. The impossible maneuver wasn't about skill alone. It was about trust. Trusting her instincts. Trusting the machine. Trusting that years of training had prepared her for this exact nightmare. The jet leveled slightly. Not perfect, but enough to slow the descent. Enough to buy time. "Altitude stabilizing," Harris said, disbelief flooding his voice. How did you?" Emily's eyes flicked to him, just for a second. "Don't question it. Just keep us talking to a TC. We're not out of this yet." He nodded quickly, swallowing hard. "Denver Center, Delta 227. Captain stabilized descent. Requesting priority landing." "Affirmative. 227. You are cleared direct. Emergency crews are standing by." The controllers didn't know what she had just done. Few would ever believe it. Emily exhaled slowly, her jaw tight. She could feel the sweat beneath her collar, the tension in her shoulders. But her mind was calm, sharp. She wasn't flying a commercial jet anymore. She was flying a fighter, one she refused to let crash. The ground loomed closer, but for the first time since the explosion, there was a glimmer of hope. "Ladies and gentlemen," Emily finally spoke into the intercom, her voice steady, controlled. "This is your captain. We are experiencing technical difficulties, but the situation is under control. Please remain calm and seated. We will be landing shortly." The words were simple, but to the passengers, they were lifelines. A hush fell across the cabin. Fear didn't vanish, but it was tempered by belief that the woman in the cockpit knew what she was doing. In truth, she was doing what no one else would dare. The impossible maneuver had worked. But the fight wasn't over. The landing, the most dangerous part, still lay ahead. And Emily knew one thing with absolute certainty. The sky had given her a second chance. Now it was up to her to finish the job. The morning after the landing, headlines screamed across the nation. "Pilot saves 169. Lives in near catastrophe. Delta captain executes impossible maneuver. Hero in the sky. Who is Captain Emily Walker?" Her photo was everywhere, though she hadn't posed for a single shot. Someone had captured her stepping off the aircraft, tall, composed, her uniform crisp despite the ordeal. In her eyes, a steely calm that unsettled and fascinated the public. Airline passengers flooded social media with their versions of the story. Some described her as ice-cold under pressure, others as a real-life superhero. One passenger claimed he saw the aircraft bank in a way no commercial jet should ever bank. Another swore that during the descent, she had flown like it was a fighter jet. The rumor mill began. At a Denver hotel, Emily tried to disappear into anonymity. She sipped black coffee in the quiet corner of the lobby, hair pulled back, uniform jacket folded neatly beside her. The airline had insisted she rest, but rest was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the resistance of the yoke, the jolt of the wheels hitting the runway, the cries of passengers. Harris appeared, looking both restless and guilty. He carried a newspaper tucked under his arm. "They're calling you a hero," he said softly. Emily raised a brow. "They're calling us lucky." He shook his head, pulled the paper free, and slid it across the table. There she was, front page, her name in bold. Emily sighed. This is exactly what I didn't want. Harris sat, lowering his voice. Emily, I've been flying for 15 years. I know the book. I know the procedures. But what you did yesterday, it wasn't airline training. It was something else. You handled that jet like... He trailed off, afraid to finish. Emily's eyes met his. Calm, guarded. Like what? Like a fighter pilot. The words hung between them. She didn't confirm. She didn't deny. She only looked back into her coffee. The whispers grew louder with every passing day. Reporters dug into her past. They uncovered her spotless airline record, her years of service, her professionalism praised by peers. But before her commercial career, silence, a blank decade, no records, no details. As if she had simply appeared one day, already a fully formed captain. One journalist, a sharp-eyed aviation blogger named Trevor Hayes, noticed the oddities. He published a post titled, Delta's Hero Captain Ex-Military? In it, he highlighted eyewitness reports of the unusual maneuver, the sideslip, the drag correction, the precision landing. These are not skills taught in commercial pilot schools, he wrote. They belong to another world entirely. Fighter pilot world. The article went viral. Inside aviation circles, the whispers became conversations. Retired Air Force pilots traded texts and calls. Some recognized the name Emily Walker. Others swore they remembered a call sign, Valkyrie. Wasn't she the one who flew the F-22 program early on? One asked. Didn't she beat 3 squadrons in simulated dogfights? Another replied. Last I heard, she walked away. But why? Each conversation fueled the legend. Emily's airline tried to shield her, but it was impossible. Cameras followed her to airports. Interview requests piled up. News anchors called her America's Top Gun. Late-night hosts joked she should replace Tom Cruise in the next sequel. She hated it. To her, the story wasn't about glory. It was about survival, about keeping 169 people alive. She hadn't wanted the spotlight then, and she certainly didn't want it now. But the more she deflected, the more the public became convinced she was hiding something. One evening, she received a call from an unfamiliar number. She considered ignoring it, but instinct made her answer. Walker, she said simply. A familiar voice chuckled on the other end, gravelly, confident. Still answering like you're on comms, huh, Valkyrie? Emily froze. She hadn't heard that name in years. Who is this? You don't remember me? Lieutenant Colonel Daniels. Training Squadron, Nellis. I'll never forget the day you pulled 11 Gs in the sim and scared the hell out of the instructors. Her chest tightened. Memories surged sweat, oxygen masks, the roar of engines, the endless Nevada sky. What do you want? She asked flatly. Daniel's tone softened. What you did up there, saving those people? It's all over the news. Pilots are talking. They know it was you. They know Valkyrie still got it. She swallowed hard. I'm not Valkyrie anymore. Maybe not. But the world just remembered her. He hung up before she could respond. Later that night, she stood at her hotel window, staring at the city lights. For years, she had built a life away from the past, away from the roar of jet engines and the weight of classified missions. She had traded adrenaline for routine, danger for safety. But safety had never been her destiny. And now, with whispers spreading and old comrades resurfacing, she knew the truth was no longer hers to bury. At the airline headquarters the next day, executives convened a press conference. Emily sat at the long table, uniform immaculate, face unreadable. Reporters filled the room, microphones pointed like weapons. One asked, Captain Walker, aviation experts say your maneuver was military in nature. Were you, in fact, a fighter pilot? Flashbulbs erupted. Emily didn't flinch. She folded her hands, voice even. My focus was on bringing the aircraft down safely. That's all I'll say about that. It wasn't confirmation. But it wasn't denial either. The whispers exploded into certainty. In bars near Air Force bases, veterans raised toasts to her name. In aviation schools, instructors told her story to wide-eyed cadets, and online forums buzzed. She was one of us. She was Top Gun. Emily, meanwhile, carried on quietly flying her routes, performing her duties, speaking little. But the silence only deepened the legend. Passengers who boarded her flights whispered to each other, "That's her. That's the one who saved the Denver flight." Some even requested autographs. She always declined politely, because Emily Walker wasn't chasing fame. She was running from it. Yet she knew the world was closing in, piece by piece, peeling away the layers of secrecy she had built. And somewhere deep inside, a question haunted her. If the past had caught her once, would it demand more? The runway stretched ahead like a promise and a threat. From the cockpit, Captain Emily Walker could see the faint shimmer of emergency vehicles clustered along the tarmac. Fire trucks, ambulances, and rescue crews, all waiting for the worst. Their flashing lights turned the runway into a stage, one where failure meant catastrophe for 169 souls. The aircraft was still wounded. Every vibration in the yoke reminded her of its fragility, like flying a bird with broken wings. The left engine was gone. Hydraulics only half responsive. The control surfaces groaned with every adjustment. She wasn't just guiding a machine, she was coaxing a stubborn, dying giant to hold on a little longer. Beside her, First Officer Harris flipped rapidly through checklists, sweat dampening his collar. Landing gear indicators aren't confirming green. Could be sensor error. Could be more. His voice cracked. Emily didn't look at him. We'll assume they're down until proven otherwise. And if they're not? He asked, her jaw clenched. Then we make it work. Her voice carried no fear. No hesitation. Just resolve. It was the same tone she'd once used over combat comms, when split-second decisions meant life or death. Harris had heard it before, but only in movies. Hearing it now, in the middle of their crisis, both terrified and steadied him. Tower, Delta 227 is on final approach, Harris said into the mic. His voice trembled slightly. Delta 227, wind call. You are cleared to land. Emergency equipment standing by. Emily didn't acknowledge. She didn't need to. Her entire being was locked on the task before her. The cabin was a universe of quiet desperation. Some passengers gripped seatbacks, knuckles pale. Others whispered frantic prayers. A little girl clutched a teddy bear so tightly its seams strained. Flight attendants sat strapped in, eyes closed, lips moving silently. And yet somehow the captain's voice still echoed in their minds. The situation is under control. They believed her. They had to. Emily adjusted the approach angle, compensating for the drag imbalance. The aircraft wobbled, resisting her touch, but she countered each movement with surgical precision. Every correction was a conversation between her and the Jet One last dance with a partner too tired to keep up. Speed? She asked. 160 knots, Harris said. Bleed it to 145. She adjusted throttle, careful not to stall. The ground grew larger in the windshield. The runway lights glowed brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. Her own heartbeat, by contrast, was steady. Fighter pilot steady. She remembered her first carrier landing drill in the F-22 simulator. The instructor had barked, "A carrier doesn't forgive mistakes, Walker. It punishes them." Back then, she'd stuck the landing against all odds. Today's runway wasn't moving, but the stakes were infinitely higher. Altitude 1,000. Harris called. The fire trucks below grew clearer now, red paint reflecting in the evening sun. Their nozzles were already aimed. Altitude 500. Passengers braced. Some screamed. Others sobbed silently. The engines roared unevenly, one alive, one dead. Emily didn't flinch. Altitude 200. The ground raced up to meet them. She eased back on the yoke, muscles taut, as if she could physically hold the aircraft in the air a second longer. Altitude 100. Hold together, she whispered, not to Harris, not to herself, but to the aircraft. Just a little longer. The wheels touched down with a screech. For a split second, the cabin erupted with premature cheers. Then the plane lurched violently to the left, the dead engine pulling them off centerline. Emily's grip tightened. She slammed rudder and aileron corrections with fighter pilot reflexes. The jet skidded, tires screaming, smoke pouring from rubber dragged across asphalt. The cabin was chaos again, gasps, cries, the rattle of loose items clattering across the floor. Come on, come on, Harris shouted. Emily fought the controls like taming a beast, refusing to let it veer off the runway. Her arms burned with effort, feet pressing so hard into the pedals they ached. And then, miraculously, the aircraft straightened. The roar softened as speed bled off. The runway markers blurred less and less. The chaos in the cabin shifted, fear transformed into disbelief. And finally, silence. The aircraft rolled to a stop. For 3 long seconds, no one moved. Not the crew, not the passengers, not even Emily. The world held its breath. Then an eruption. Passengers cheered, sobbed, clapped, shouted her name, though most didn't even know it. Flight attendants unbuckled, tears streaking their faces as they hugged one another. Relief swept through the cabin like a tidal wave. Tower, Delta 227. Full stop, runway secure, Harris reported, his voice breaking with emotion. Copy, 227. Emergency cruise en route. Emily sat back, finally allowing herself a breath. Her hands trembled faintly as she released the yoke. Only now did the enormity hit her. She had kept 169 lives from becoming a headline. But she didn't smile. Not yet. She knew the story wasn't about her. It was about the people in back who would get to hug their families tonight. Rescue vehicles surrounded the plane within seconds, spraying foam around the smoking tires. Firefighters peered up into the cockpit windows with wide-eyed admiration. Medics rushed to the cabin, checking passengers one by one, though most were unharmed beyond shock and scrapes. Emily opened the cockpit door. For the first time since the explosion, the passengers saw her face. Calm, composed, professional. Some clapped again. Others whispered. One child blurted out, "She looks like a superhero." Emily simply nodded. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Denver." Her voice was steady, almost casual. But her eyes gave away the exhaustion hidden beneath. Hours later, when the last passenger had disembarked and rescue crews had dispersed, Emily lingered alone in the cockpit. The cabin was quiet now, smelling faintly of smoke and adrenaline. Harris leaned against the doorway. You saved us." "I don't even know how." Emily ran a hand across the worn yoke, almost tenderly. "We saved us, Harris." "All of us." He shook his head. "No. I've flown with dozens of captains. None of them could have done what you just did. That maneuver, those corrections, hell, the landing itself. That wasn't airline training." Emily didn't answer. She stared out at the runway, lit by fading orange light. Her past pressed at the edges of her silence. The world had just seen a glimpse of a life she thought she'd left behind. For now, she let the mystery linger. When she finally stepped off the plane, emergency crews stood lined along the tarmac, some applauding, some simply staring in awe. Cameras clicked in the distance, passengers telling their stories already. But Emily Walker didn't bask in it. She walked with quiet dignity, a silent hero who had done her job. No more, no less. Inside her, though, she knew the truth. She had flown that plane the way she once flew fighters, on instinct, on courage, on unyielding refusal to quit. And though the passengers would never forget her, Emily intended to remain what she had always been, just a pilot who refused to let anyone fall from the sky. The whispers had turned into demands. Reporters pressed harder, veterans spoke more openly, and the public clamored for answers. For weeks, Emily deflected, keeping her past locked away. But eventually, the truth has a way of forcing itself into the light. It happened during a live interview, one her airline practically begged her to attend in hopes of calming the media storm. The studio was polished, the lights too bright, the anchor disarmingly pleasant. "Captain Walker," the anchor said with a practiced smile, "America knows you as the woman who saved 169 lives. But there's a gap in your history, nearly a decade of silence. Many believe you once served as a fighter pilot. Can you confirm that?" The room seemed to shrink. Cameras hummed. Millions waited on her words. Emily inhaled slowly. She thought of all the nights she'd buried that past, all the reasons she'd left. But something inside her shifted. Maybe it was the faces of the passengers who had hugged her after Denver. Maybe it was the veterans who still called her Valkyrie with pride. She met the anchor's gaze. "Yes," she said finally. "I was a fighter pilot." The studio went silent. The truth spread faster than rumor ever could. Within hours, networks replayed the clip endlessly. The phrase "Top Gun passed" trended worldwide. Former squadron mates spoke on record, filling in the gaps of her story. Emily Walker's hidden history was laid bare. She had entered the Air Force Academy at 20, a cadet from a modest Midwest town with more grit than privilege. From the start, she stood out not just for her intellect, but for her relentless drive. While others struggled to balance academics and physical training, she seemed fueled by the challenge. By the time she graduated, she had her sights locked on the impossible. The F-22 Raptor program, the pinnacle of American air dominance. Few women had ever flown it. Fewer still had passed the grueling selection process. Emily did. At Nellis Air Force Base, she earned her call sign the hard way. During an intense dogfight simulation, her instructor had barked, "You dive like a Valkyrie, fearless, reckless, singing death." The name stuck. Valkyrie. Her career soared. She mastered the Raptor, a machine so advanced it seemed to anticipate its pilot's thoughts. She flew at altitudes where the earth curved below her, at speeds that blurred the world into streaks of color. Her peers respected her. Some envied her. She shattered barriers quietly, never asking for applause, just pushing harder every day. There were missions she could never speak about, patrols along contested airspace, tense intercepts where the line between peace and conflict thinned to a hair's breadth. More than once, she'd flown within visual range of foreign fighters, locked eyes with their pilots, and prayed neither side twitched first. And then there were the classified assignments. Rumors hinted at precision strikes, Black Ops escort missions, and experimental flight tests that pushed the Raptor to its limits. Her record was spotless, but it came at a cost. In interviews, former squadron mates revealed pieces of her story. "She was the best stick I ever saw," said Major Torres, her old wingman. "But she carried weight. You could see it in her eyes after certain missions." She never bragged, just got quieter. She beat 3 squadrons in back-to-back exercises once, another recalled. Command said it was impossible. She made it look easy. But there was one story they all agreed on. The night Valkyrie saved her entire squadron. It was a training op turned nightmare, unexpected weather, malfunctioning systems, and hostile radar contacts that weren't supposed to be there. With comms breaking up, chaos threatened to consume the exercise. Emily had taken lead, guiding her wingmen through storms and electronic interference, calling maneuvers with unshakable precision. They all made it back. After that, even hardened veterans looked at her differently. So why had she left? The answer emerged slowly, like a wound reopening. During her final years, Emily's missions had blurred into politics. She watched friends burn out, marriages crumble, promising pilots lost to accidents or decisions made in rooms far from the cockpit. Each loss carved deeper. The breaking point came after a classified mission that went wrong, details never revealed, consequences etched in her silence. A pilot didn't come home. Emily bore the weight of it, convinced she could have done more, even if command said otherwise. That night, she removed her wings from her uniform and set them on the desk of her commanding officer. "Sir, I'm done," she said simply. And just like that, Valkyrie was gone. She vanished from military records, her service buried beneath redacted lines. To the world, she became Emily Walker, commercial pilot. She swapped afterburners for steady routes, adrenaline for routine. Passengers called her Captain, not Valkyrie. She preferred it that way. Until Denver forced the past into the present. The revelations made her a reluctant celebrity. News anchors praised her as both pioneer and savior. Veterans lauded her service. Young cadets wrote letters, saying she inspired them to chase wings of their own. But not everyone celebrated. Some critics resurfaced old debates about women in combat roles, questioning whether her maneuvers in Denver had been recklessness disguised as genius. Others speculated about the classified missions, spinning theories from fragments of truth. Emily ignored it all. What mattered to her were the people who had lived, because she hadn't forgotten who she was, even after all those years. One evening, she visited the Air Force Memorial in Washington, D.C. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the towering spires that reached toward the sky. She walked quietly, her steps measured, until she stood before the engraved names of fallen pilots. Her hand traced one name in particular, the wingman who hadn't come home. The reason she'd walked away. "I flew again," she whispered. "For them. For the ones I saved. Maybe for you too." The wind stirred, cool and steady, like the breath of engines in the distance. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry. The world now knew Valkyrie. But Emily Walker wasn't sure she knew herself anymore. Was she the quiet airline captain who wanted nothing but ordinary skies? Or was she still the fighter pilot who defied odds, carried scars, and saved lives when others couldn't? Perhaps she was both. And as whispers became respect, and respect became legend, she realized something else. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to every pilot who had ever taken the sky, to every passenger who trusted unseen hands, and to every dreamer who looked up and wondered what it took to fly. The Denver incident had made Captain Emily Walker a household name. Television interviews, magazine covers, and endless news reports tried to define her. Hero, Top Gun pilot, miracle worker in the skies. Yet Emily herself remained quiet, choosing to let her actions speak louder than words. She continued flying commercial routes, greeting passengers with the same polite smile she had always carried, all the while carrying the weight of her past and the memory of the lives she had saved. But the world had changed. Whispers about Valkyrie had grown into a legend. Aviation forums dissected her maneuvers. Mechanics speculated over her split-second decisions, and young pilots debated whether they could ever hope to reach such a level of skill. She became more than a pilot. She became a symbol of precision, courage, and restraint under unimaginable pressure. Emily knew she couldn't hide forever. Eventually, someone would ask the question she had avoided for years. Why? After reaching the pinnacle of her military career, had she abandoned the life of a fighter pilot? The truth was complicated. She had left because the stakes of the past had taken more than she could carry, because the sacrifices required of that life had scarred her in ways invisible to most. Yet the same instincts that had driven her to leave had also kept her alive in Denver, and kept 169 others alive with her. It started subtly at first. Cadets at the Flight Academy reached out with letters and messages, asking for guidance, tips, advice on handling high-stress situations in the cockpit. They didn't need a story of heroics. They wanted her insight. Emily, once hesitant to share, began responding. Short messages at first, then longer, mentoring sessions, phone calls. She realized that the same calm judgment that had saved lives could now be passed on. Her influence grew. Air Force bases invited her to speak to pilots in training. She told them what she could about focus, precision, calm under pressure, and the unyielding responsibility that came with every flight. She never spoke of classified missions. She didn't have to. Her lessons were universal. Courage, discipline, and the moral clarity to act decisively when everything else seemed lost. Meanwhile, the aviation world began to honor her legacy. Museums requested her to donate artifacts from her past flights. One of the original flight jackets she had worn as Valkyrie was displayed alongside F-22 memorabilia, representing a bridge between military innovation and commercial responsibility. Flight schools named programs after her, emphasizing situational awareness, critical thinking, and crisis management. Young women in particular saw her as a role model, a living testament that barriers could be broken without losing one's humanity. Emily avoided the spotlight, but she couldn't escape the subtle ways her story inspired others. She found herself in classrooms, standing before eager cadets, guiding them through simulator exercises that replicated emergency scenarios. She watched wide-eyed students execute maneuvers she had once performed at supersonic speed, and she allowed herself a small, private smile each time they succeeded. The Denver flight became more than a headline. It became a case study in aviation safety and emergency management. Airlines around the world studied the maneuver she had executed, incorporating lessons into pilot training. Researchers called it an unprecedented example of improvisation under extreme stress. To Emily, however, it wasn't about fame. It was about what worked and the lives it had saved. Despite her public legend, Emily remained grounded. She returned to her simple routines, walking the same streets and cities she landed in, having coffee in quiet corners, reading books she had long neglected, and spending evenings reflecting in solitude. She sometimes thought about the passengers on Flight 227, wondering how their lives had changed because she had refused to give up. She imagined parents hugging children tighter, spouses cherishing moments more deeply, strangers exchanging gratitude. The thought carried a quiet, persistent joy she had never anticipated. Yet, even as she enjoyed her anonymity, Emily was aware of the subtle tension in her identity, the duality of Valkyrie and Captain Walker. One existed in the shadows of military precision, the other in public order and responsibility. Both had shaped her, and she understood now that her life was a mosaic of experiences, inseparable yet distinct. Months turned into years. Emily received letters from passengers who had been on Flight 227, some now adults with children of their own. They described birthdays celebrated, milestones reached, and dreams pursued, all made possible because she had kept the aircraft from disaster. One letter, from a father who had been holding his child during the crisis, simply read, "You gave us a second chance. Thank you for every breath we now take because of your courage." Emily kept these letters in a drawer, revisiting them on quiet nights. They were reminders that the ripple of a single courageous act could reach far beyond its immediate moment. touching lives in ways she could never fully measure. Her story eventually reached Hollywood. Producers wanted to dramatize Flight 227. Documentaries were proposed. Movie deals were offered. Emily declined each one. She refused to become entertainment. She wanted the focus to remain on the principles of aviation safety, courage under pressure, and the quiet heroism of everyday pilots who performed their duties without fanfare. Even the Top Gun connection, along the subject of speculation, was treated delicately. Emily granted a few interviews, carefully explaining that her military training had equipped her with instincts that, under extreme circumstances, allowed her to save lives. But she never glorified combat. She emphasized responsibility, teamwork, and the weight of the decisions a pilot carries. And then came a day she hadn't anticipated. A young pilot approached her after a training seminar, nervously clutching a small flight log. "Captain Walker," he said, eyes wide, "I just wanted to thank you. Flight 227. Your story inspired me to become a better pilot. To be calm when it matters, to think beyond procedures, to trust my instincts. I hope I can live up to your example." Emily studied him. In his voice and posture, she recognized the same determination she had felt at his age, the same hunger to push boundaries responsibly. "You will," she said quietly. "And when you do, remember this. It's not the maneuver, the plane, or the accolades that matter. It's the lives you protect, the choices you make when no one else can see, and the courage to act when the world expects hesitation." The young pilot nodded, humbled. Emily knew she had done more than save lives that day. She had planted seeds for the next generation of aviators. As the sun set over Denver one evening, Emily stood on the tarmac near a parked airliner. The sky glowed gold and crimson, the clouds reflecting a tapestry of possibility. She ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the metal beneath her fingers, remembering the roar, the tension, the victory of Flight 227. Her legacy was not built in headlines or applause. It was built in lives lived, in lessons passed on, in courage carried silently across the skies. Valkyrie was no longer just a call sign or a memory. She existed in every pilot who approached the cockpit with precision, care, and bravery. Emily Walker, the quiet hero of Denver, the woman who had once soared above the earth in an F-22, now understood the full weight of her life's journey. Heroism was not about fame or recognition. It was about steadfastness, responsibility, and the courage to act decisively when the moment demanded it. And as she walked back toward the terminal, the hum of aircraft engines echoing around her, she knew she had left a mark on the world that no headline, no documentary, and no rumor could ever erase. Because legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about the lives you touch and the skies you leave forever safer for those who follow. Captain Emily Walker, Valkyrie, had done just that.